Let's see what the news has in store for us this week. Co-pilot first. We'll see what he has to say. So, from independent news outlets. So, the top one, government accountability and civil liberties. Independent outlets frequently track surveillance policy, policing powers, and transparency issues. Something that we've been covering on the Digital Bill of Rights that we're actually going through at the moment on our Wednesday research hub. If you haven't checked that out, it's worth having a look. Government accountability and civil liberties. The problem we have at the moment with our government is they've become a dictatorship. So they're telling us what they're going to do. They're not consulting us about what they're doing at all. And they would argue that there is some consultation going on, like we are asking you what your views are and what you think. However, they are utilizing surveillance technologies now as we speak, out in our towns and our cities. They are choosing to use surveillance, and it wasn't something that we asked for us. So from a government point of view, our civil liberties are being encroached upon. However, government looks like it's in flux at the moment. So we'll see if this continues, or whether the people will rise up and actually argue that this is not something we asked for. This is not something that was part of the Labour manifesto when it came to them getting into power. This has all been placed upon us. So there is government accountability. Well, we would like to hold them accountable. We'll see if that happens. Climate and environment, especially local ecological impacts, infrastructure failures, and energy policy scrutiny. Okay. I'm not sure how you feel about the climate problems. I would use the word problems along the line of, I'm not so sure we're in a climate crisis. I have shared in the past that our world, our globe, is in what would be arguably quite a cool period when you look at the history of environment over time, and that we are coming out slightly of a lower period of temperature. So it is increasing, the temperatures are increasing, but only very, very minutely compared to over time. So climate and environment, local ecological impacts. We've spoken about this before. We've spoken about when it was raining consistently and constantly, and there was flooding and we were being warned. And I said there were various things that could contribute to that, the flooding issue. One of those was the uprooting of many of our trees. And you think about the amount of uptake of water from our trees, then when they're taken down to make way for buildings and things like that, it's not surprising that some areas start to flood. But also we have problems when it comes to the infrastructure of our water. So our drains aren't cleared like they used to be. So that will be contributing to any forms of flooding. So I'm not sure whether infrastructure failures, maybe that's been kind of encapsulated in that. And the energy policy scrutiny, I would suggest that we need to start looking at our own country to produce its own energy rather than relying on foreign countries and being let down quite badly. We have oil and we have the means of being able to take that oil out of our seas. We have undersea drilling. However, that has been curtailed for some reason by our government for wanting to pay another country for their energy. It doesn't really sit well. Economic inequity and cost of living investigations. Non-mainstream outlets often highlight underreported regional hardship. Well, we've covered this. This has been something that's been ongoing, especially with our government blaming everything that's wrong in our country, and the inequality and the cost of living crisis in our country, blaming it on the wars that are going on in other countries. And I've argued over time that that's just a way to take our attention away from the fact that we're in a bad way. And the reason we're in a bad way is because our politicians are not managing our budget very well, and therefore it's down to them. So when it comes to cost of living investigations, we should be investigating our governance, looking at the taxes that we have to pay, looking at the VAT that's placed upon everything. It's like we're double taxed. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it and see what investigations unravel. Local corruption or council level controversies, a common focus for independent regional reporters. Local corruption, so that's going to be some form of misappropriation of funds, I would suggest. Council level controversies, so each council is allocated some fund from our government, and if there's local corruption or council level controversies, then that suggests that our councils are not allocating the funds adequately to help the people. That would be a big, big problem. Foreign policy criticism, particularly UK involvement in conflicts, arms exports and diplomatic alignments. UK involvement in conflicts, we already know that we're involved in Ukraine. We're funding Ukraine. We're giving money that we really can't afford as a country, considering the cost of living crisis, to Ukraine. And there have been reports of misappropriation and corruption in Ukraine. So I would suggest we're throwing good money after bad. So that's an issue. We also know that we are involved in the conflict in Iran. We are utilizing the bases in our country for America to be able to equip their aircraft with the bombs that they are taking over to Iran and dropping on Iran in an illegal war. So that, from a foreign policy point of view, that's a big criticism. People in this country are not happy about that. And also the fact that we're being gaslit by our government, who would argue that we're not. No, we're not involved in the war. No, it's not down to us. But we know we are. We know we are, but our government gaslight us. Arms exports, there was the Belgium customs that stopped a shipment from the UK in Belgium because it contained components that go towards making arms, and it was heading towards Israel. And we actually have some form of legislation in this country that's not permitted. That's not allowed. So yes, foreign policy criticism over that, because people are waking up. People are waking up to what is actually going on. The fact that money is being funneled out of our country, the fact that we are participating in wars that we weren't ever asked if we wanted to get involved in, and we are participating by supplying arms to a genocidal country. People are waking up. Diplomatic alignments, well, that could be something to do with the Mandelson alignment with the US, and the fact that we've obviously had to replace Mandelson as I think he was the foreign correspondent to the US. I could be wrong on that. He was definitely our diplomat in America, and obviously he will have had to have been replaced. So there may well be some controversy over who's been put in place to replace Mandelson. Not sure, but nothing from co-pilot, Really quite concise, actually, from Copilot this week. Um, it says what they're likely covering this week, and it tells me what independent news outlets it's checked. Nothing from a health and wellbeing point of view that we should be concentrating on particularly. So now we'll go to Claude and we'll ask Claude the same question. So here's the roundup of the biggest UK news stories from the past 7 days from Claude. Top of the heap. Now, this wasn't particularly mentioned by Copilot. It was gone around the houses, Copilot, a little bit, been very vague. But top of the heap for Claude is Labour's local election collapse and Starmer's leadership crisis. Labour suffered major losses in local and regional elections held across Britain last week, with the party losing the most seats of any party. Right-wing populist Reform UK made significant gains, while left-wing Greens also recorded notable wins. In the wake of the defeat, Labour lost more than 1,400 councillors in England, largely to Reform UK and the Greens. Backbencher Labour MP Catherine West urged cabinet ministers to move quickly to replace Starmer, saying she would collect names of Labour MPs, calling on him to set a timetable for a new leader by September. By Tuesday, the 12th of May, 4 junior ministers had resigned from the government. Maita Farnbella, Jess Phillips, Alex Davis-Jones and Zubair Ahmed, all calling for Starmer to stand down or set a timetable for his departure. More than 80 Labour MPs publicly called for Starmer to resign. Starmer has refused, insisting a leadership contest would be damaging. Of course he's refused. Of course he's refused. He doesn't want to leave. However, his party is now turning against him, and it was a monumental defeat. A monumental defeat. Saying that if a general election was called, then Reform would definitely get in, because just in I did say that I would bring you what happened in Gateshead as a borough. Now, our borough is divided into 22 different kind of constituents or constituencies. I don't know if that's the right word, actually, but it's divided into 22 parts. And in Gateshead alone, Labour lost 34 seats. And I did say that Gateshead has been staunch Labour for as long as I can remember. For as long as I've lived here, it's been staunch Labour. So they lost 34 seats. 38 seats. It was 38 they lost out of the 22 areas that they largely controlled. And Reform gained 34 of those losses, and the Greens gained the extras. So there are very few Labour councillors now in Gateshead that have been voted for by the people, and that's just in Gateshead. So I mean, to have lost 1,400 councillors in England, well, they lost 38 just in Gateshead alone. Oh dear. Wales breaks from Labour. Plaid Cymru wins. In last week's election, the Labour vote collapsed in Wales, and it was Plaid Cymru, a pro-independence party, who won the most seats. This means that all 3 regions of the UK outside England are now governed by nationalist pro-independence parties. Oh dear. Poor old Starmer. He's going to have to leave. And I knew my prediction would come true. They've said by September. I said by mid this year. So I would say, in my opinion, allegedly, no, not allegedly at all, but in my opinion, I predicted that Starmer would be gone by mid this year. So I think he'll be gone by the end of June, beginning of July. I don't think Labour will, I don't think they would risk calling a general election. And like I said, even if they did, reform would get in and it would just be another cheek to the same backside. So it doesn't really matter who's in power. However, I think Starmer will stand down by the end of June, beginning of July. I don't think he will be in the Prime Minister's seat at that point. However, whoever takes up the mantle, it's the policies that are absolutely terrible. So they're still going to try and push the policies, even if Starmer is unseated. The King's Speech, 35 plus bills announced today. Today's King's Speech, the second under this government, unveiled over 35 bills and draft bills targeting economic, energy, and national security. Measures include an energy independence bill to tackle the affordability crisis, immigration reform legislation, National Health Service reform, and laws to end the leasehold system. Notable inclusions are the Hillsborough Law, a duty of candour for public servants, legislation enabling peerages to be removed, a remediation bill to speed up unsafe cladding fixes, and a draft conversion practices bill. A draft conversion practices bill. Well, that came out today, so we're on the ball when it comes to the news. One of the big things that I read on social media about the King's Speech is not all of this. It's not what's being told to me by Claude. It's the fact that the King's Speech evidently included that we are going to have a digital ID, whether us citizens like it or not, according to the King. So that regardless of consultation, regardless of us saying that we don't want it, regardless of us protesting, campaigning, and standing up and shouting from the rooftops, our King has decided that we will do as we're bloody well told. I'm really sad to tell him that I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that we're going to do as we're told. I think we are going to stand up and say, no. The digital ID puts the infrastructure in place for CBDC and this digital monitoring, this blanket monitoring of us, like facial recognition technologies, all those AI technologies that will keep a strict kind of noose around our necks. And our King has decided to make a stand on it. I think that he will regret that, because I think that we could end up with a dissolution of the monarchy in this country if he pushes it. British Steel nationalisation. The government announced legislation that would give it the power to bring British Steel into public ownership, potentially returning the company to government control for the first time since 1988. The Scunthorpe plant, the last site in the UK producing primary steel, had been owned by Chinese group Xinjiang. Well, I would suggest that's probably a good thing to bring it back into public ownership. Okay, point 5, UK borrowing costs spike amid political turmoil. Britain's borrowing costs were already rising more than other major economies before the Labour leadership crisis helped push gilt yields to multi-decade highs. Oh, fantastic. Well, one of the things, I mean, that's our borrowing costs. I mean, I don't know whether that has anything to do with the national debt. I'm not really up on that. But all I do know is our national debt is not as big as America's, but then we're a smaller country. Point 6, record cold May temperature. The UK recorded its coldest May overnight temperature on record at 6.1 degrees Celsius in Altnahara in the Scottish Highlands, while Shetland experienced heavy snowfall. Okay, so we're back to weather. I don't think that's too much of an issue, though. May can be quite changeable. Point 7. UK-US military tensions over Iran war. 3 more B-52 bomber aircraft arrived at RAF Fairford after Starmer agreed to allow US aircraft to take off from UK airbases for defence purposes. We know that they are loading bombs onto those bombers, so that's hardly for defence purposes. Starmer warned of the war's impending potential impact on the UK economy, while the Chancellor said she would look at challenges for households reliant on oil fuel heating as the global oil price briefly exceeded $100 a barrel. You know my feelings on this. If they looked at the tax and they looked at the VAT that they put on our oil and our energy in general, then we wouldn't be suffering quite so bad. So when she says she's looking at the challenges for households reliant on oil fuel heating, possibly they're actually going to do something about that. I wouldn't hold my breath though, because it probably won't happen. So that's it from Claude. It says, quite a week, a political crisis, a new parliamentary session, and record cold temperatures all at once. But nothing, again, that I would go into from a health and wellbeing point of view. There's one thing that hasn't come up that I'm quite surprised about, from which we would look at from a health and wellbeing point of view, and I have done a little bit of research on, but it's not come up in the news so far. So we'll see. And we'll ask Grok exactly the same question. So, the dominant news stories over the past week, according to Grok: local elections and political crisis. Labour under Keir Starmer suffered heavy defeats, losing control of numerous councils and over 1,400 to 1,500 seats in England, with some variation in final tallies across reports. Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, emerged as a big winner with around 1,450 plus seat gains, making strong inroads into traditional Labour red wall areas in the North and Midlands. For example, gains and controls pushes in places like Barnsley, Sunderland, Hartlepool and Wigan. The Greens and the Lib Dems also picked up seats in various areas. Well, I told you they picked up, Reform picked up seats in Gateshead, and also the Greens did. Not many, but a few Green seats in Gateshead now. Starmer has vowed to stay on, calling results tough, but framing it as no reason to plunge the country into chaos. Oh, really? I would argue he's already done that. He's already done that. There's been so many calls for him to resign. He has definitely already done that. However, reports indicate internal pressure, with Labour MPs calling for him to go. Potential challenges from West Streeting or others. West Streeting. Oh dear, that's out of one frying pan straight into another. Mr. West Streeting has been receiving funds from the medical industry. He's the man who's in charge of our National Health Service. And speculation about replacements like Andy Burnham, Mr. Pro-Israel. Some coverage notes up over 40 MPs pushing back or resignations. Well, 40 MPs is not a lot when it comes to the House of Commons and the amount of MPs that they have, but it might be enough to gain some momentum to get Starmer out of his seat. From independent left outlets like Novara Media, emphasis on the collapse of two-party dominance, Labour's Project Fear against Greens, weaponising anti-Semitism claims pre-election, and analyses downplaying reforms surge in some places while highlighting broader shifts. For example, post-Britain era in Wales, more pro-Indie MSPs in Scotland. Byline Times independent investigative coverage of scandal hit reform candidates who still won, critiques of Starmer's strategy, Blue Labour legacy, and calls for leadership change not just due to unpopularity, but underlying issues. This is widely seen as a historic shift, with reform capitalising on discontent over immigration, costs, and governance. So that goes back to what I said about anybody who comes in and takes over from Starmer. It's not the actual person that is, well, he is despised. He is, I think, across the whole country, he's quite despised. But it's the policies. It's the policies. It doesn't matter whose bum is on the seat. It's the policies that need to be reviewed. It's the policies that need to be changed. Okay. Tommy Robinson Unite the Kingdom rally, May the 16th. A major upcoming event is the Unite the Kingdom rally march in London on May the 16th, promoted by Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon. It focuses on British identity, immigration, and two-tier policing. Organisers call for it to be peaceful, expectations are high turnout. The government, Starmer, Home Secretary, has banned several foreign speakers, agitators is what they're calling them, from entering the UK to attend. This includes actions against journalists like AV Yemeni, Rebel News, drawing free speech and overreach criticism in alternative circles. It coincides with a pro-Palestine Nakba Day march, raising police concerns about clashes. X and Independent Chatter highlights migrant-related incidents, security license concerns, and Islamist influence claims. For example, groups affecting speaker bans. It is a ridiculous time, or I would argue that it's a ridiculous time, but Tommy Robinson would probably say that, no, it's the perfect time to hold it at the same day as the pro-Palestine march, because they know that there will be clashes, and it's probably a bit of a disaster waiting to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. We'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. Other recurring themes in alternative and independent coverage: immigration and cultural tensions, viral clips, discussions on unqualified migrants in security roles, broader integration debates, and government responses. Now, that's come from Broken Britain. I haven't seen anything about that, but it wouldn't surprise me that they're putting unqualified migrants into security roles. Economic energy undercurrents, mentions of British gas, oil potential, steel nationalisation, positive in some left coverage, and cost of living links to political discontent. So we've covered that. We've argued about that. Broader critiques. Outlets like Byline focus on dark money, Russian influence networks, targeting reform and others, big tech accountability, and Palestine-related activism. For example, sentencing concerns for Palestine action. Novara highlights left alternatives, green potential, and anti-establishment angles. Now, I did see there were pro-Palestine activists that had been brought before the court under, I think the charges were vandalism. Now, the court are actually looking at the charges as vandalism linked to terrorism. So they're linking it to terrorism. And the big hoo-ha over this is it was a jury case, and the jury were not allowed to be told that when it came to sentencing, it would be under the Terrorism Act. None of the jury were aware of that. So they weren't aware, because as a jury, you can vote, you can cast your vote according to your conscience. But if you're not equipped with all of the information, then yes, what they did was definitely vandalism. So therefore, they are guilty of vandalism. However, the vandalism that occurred was because of the issues with the businesses that they targeted, basically funneling parts to Israel so that Israel can continue their genocidal behaviour. So from that point of view, we know that it's from the terrorism angle, they're not terrorists, they're activists. But the jury weren't told that. And the people from Palestine Action, the activists, have been found guilty by the jury of vandalism, which we could argue is right. Yes, they were guilty of vandalism. However, none of the jurors were told that under a guilty verdict, they would be sentenced under the Terrorism Act. And there was a blanket, no, you can't let them know. And you would be held in contempt of court if it came out in court. So that's ongoing. The charges are in. The jury has found them guilty. So now we'll wait and find out what happens as they move forward with that. And that's it for Grok. And I'm really pleased to say, even though I did do some research on it because I thought it might come up, that hantavirus is not part of the news for the UK at the moment. Maybe if I'd have done a global news for the last 7 days, it may well have come up. But there's been a lot of speculation as to whether this is the new pandemic that we're going to be forced to lock down over. And the general feeling, if you are concerned about hantavirus, is no. It's not something that we're going to be locked up over. It's not something. They are trying to find a vaccine for it, which just, it's money peddling again. They want to find a vaccine for anything they can so that they can get some more coffers, so more pennies in their pocket. So no, there isn't a problem with hantavirus. So if you do see anything in the news and it does worry you, please don't be worried. It's not an issue. And if it is, then it will come up in the news and we will cover it and I'll do a bit of a deep dive on it. But for now, that's the news for this week.